heat hit us the moment we stepped out of the air-conditioned Jeep. It wasn't just heat, it was an oppressive, wet blanket of southern humidity that clung to your skin instantly. We were deep in the backwoods of northern Florida, miles away from the nearest paved road, looking for an uncharted spot along Cypress Creek. There were 4 of us. Mark, a self-proclaimed survivalist who had planned the trip, his girlfriend Sarah, the cautious voice of reason, Leo, the loud-mouthed joker of the group, and me, just happy to escape the city for a weekend. "This is it," Mark announced, slamming the trunk and pulling out a massive canvas tent. "Nobody comes out here. Total isolation." He was right about the isolation. The spot was beautiful in a primal way. The creek wasn't really a creek here. It widened into a stagnant, black-water lagoon choked with ancient cypress trees whose knees poked out of the mud like skeletal fingers. Spanish moss draped from every branch, gray and ghostly, swaying in the slight breeze. We set up camp about 50 yards from the water's edge, on a patch of relatively dry ground. For the first few hours, it was perfect. We cracked beers, played music, and Leo made jokes about hillbillies and banjo. But as the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere began to shift. Sarah was the first to notice it. We were gathering firewood near the tree line when she stopped, holding up a hand. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" I asked, straining my ears. "Exactly." Nothing. She was right. The deafening chorus of cicadas that had greeted our arrival had stopped abruptly. The birds were silent. Even the wind seemed to have died down. The woods had gone dead quiet. A heavy, expectant silence that felt like the world holding its breath. Mark brushed it off. Probably a bobcat nearby. They spooked the small game. Don't worry about it. But I saw the way he gripped the hatchet a little tighter as we walked back to camp. As dusk bled into night, the silence broke, but not in a comforting way. The sounds that replaced it were wet, heavy, and unfamiliar. Splashes from the lagoon that sounded too big for a bass. Rustling in the palmettos that sounded too heavy for a deer. We built the fire high. The flickering orange light carved a small circle of safety out of the overwhelming darkness. We were trying to keep the mood light, roasting marshmallows, when we heard the sound that ended the party. It came from the water's edge. It wasn't a growl, and it wasn't a hiss. It was a low, guttural, vibrating thrum that seemed to rattle in our own chests, followed by a sharp, wet clicking sound, like stones being clacked together underwater. Leo laughed nervously. "Okay, big gator out there tonight." Mark didn't laugh. He stood up slowly, grabbing the heavy-duty flashlight. "Stay here," he commanded, walking toward the bank. We watched him go. The beam of his light cut through the fog that was rising off the water. He swept the light across the surface of the lagoon. "See anything?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. "2 eyes," Mark yelled back, his voice tight. "Red ones. Wide set. It's sun goats. S. ... It's big." Then, Mark began to back away slowly. He wasn't turning his back to the water. "Mark, what is it?" I asked as he reached the firelight. His face was pale beneath his tan. "We need to pack up," he said quietly. "Now, not a gator." The eyes, ... They were too high out of the water, and they blinked sideways. We didn't argue. The panic in Mark's voice was contagious. We started throwing things haphazardly into bags. The comforting crackle of the fires suddenly felt inadequate against the encroaching dark. We were tossing sleeping bags into the back of the Jeep when we heard the sound of something leaving the water. It wasn't the slow, sliding drag of an alligator's belly on mud. This was faster. A rhythmic, scuttling sound on the packed earth. Thump scrape. It was moving with terrifying speed, closing the 50 yards between the water and our campsite in seconds. "Get in the car," Mark roared, shoving Sarah toward the passenger door. Leo was closest to the noise. "Espun around," holding up his phone flashlight. The pathetic beam hit the creature just as it entered the clearing. I will never forget that sight. It was a grotesque monument to nature gone wrong. It was massive, easily 12 feet long. From snout to tail, it had the armored, austere derm-covered hide of an ancient crocodile, black and slick with swamp water. Its jaws were long and filled with jagged teeth that spilled out of its mouth. But it didn't move like a crocodile. It didn't crawl on its belly. It stood high on 4 muscular, splayed legs, like a monitor lizard. Its neck was longer, thicker, allowing its head to swivel with unnerving agility. As the light hit it, the creature didn't freeze like a gator would. It recoiled, hissing a sound like a high-pressure steam pipe bursting. Its eyes were the worst part. They were yellow globes with horizontal slits for pupils, goat-like and utterly alien, mounted high on its skull. "Run!" Leorai screamed. Leo froze. The sheer prehistoric horror of the thing paralyzed him. The creature lunged. It covered the last 10 feet in a blur of scales and muscle. It didn't bite him. It rammed him with its armored head, knocking him clean off his feet and into the supply tent. The tent collapsed around him. The creature was on top of the canvas instantly, tearing at the fabric with claws that looked like curved railroad spikes. Mark grabbed a burning log from the fire pit, ignoring the heat against his hand. He charged the beast, bellowing, swinging the makeshift torch at its head. The creature shrieked a high-pitched, warbling cry that made my ears ring and whipped its massive tail around. The tail caught Mark in the ribs with a sickening crunch, sending him flying into the dirt. He dropped the torch. "The jeep. Start the jeep." Mark wheezed, clutching his side. I scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped them onto the floor mat. Outside, the creature had turned its attention from the ruined tent to Mark, who was trying to crawl away. It stalked toward him, its long, lizard-like tongue flickering out to taste the air. Sarah leaned over from the passenger seat, grabbed the keys, and jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed it into reverse, hitting the horn and flashing the high beams. The sudden noise and blinding light confused the beast. It reared up on its hind legs for a second, a horrifying display of height and power, before dropping back down and hissing at the vehicle. Mark managed to scramble to the passenger side door. Sarah dragged him in. "Where's Leo?" I yelled. We looked back. Leo was crawling out from under the shredded remains of the tent, dazed and bleeding from a gash on his forehead. The creature heard him. Its head snapped toward the movement. It was a race. Leo was scrambling toward the back door of the jeep. The hybrid monster was scuttling across the campsite to intercept him. "Drive. Just drive. Toward him," Mark yelled, coughing blood. I floored the accelerator, kicking up dirt, aiming the heavy steel bumper at the creature. It realized the danger and tried to pivot, its claws tearing deep gouges in the earth. The bumper clipped its hindquarters with a solid thud. The impact didn't stop it, but it spun the creature around, buying Leo just enough time to dive into the back seat. I didn't wait for him to close the door. I spun the wheel and tore out of the clearing, bouncing violently over tree roots and rocks. We could hear it behind us. For the first 100 yards, it was chasing the jeep. We could hear the heavy thump-thump-thump of its lizard legs pounding the dirt path, keeping pace with the vehicle. I pushed the jeep faster than was safe on that trail, praying we wouldn't hit a tree. Slowly, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the roar of the engine and our own ragged breathing. We didn't stop driving until we hit the main highway an hour later. We pulled into a brightly lit 24-hour Dyna parking lot, the adrenaline finally crashing. We sat in the stunned silence, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. Mark had 2 broken ribs. Leo needed 12 stitches in his head. We told the rangers it was a bear, a massive, rogue bear. They looked skeptical, but they didn't push it. We never went back to Cypress Creek. Sometimes, when it gets really quiet at night, I can still hear that sound, that vibrating thrum, followed by the wet clicking. And I see those yellow, goat-like eyes blinking sideways in the dark. There are things in the deep woods that don't belong in textbooks. Things that nature made when she was angry, and they are very, very hungry.